Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So, I was going to make this video earlier today, but I had things to do, I was quite busy. So you'll probably see this either very late Sunday night or early Monday morning, depending on when I decide to upload it. So yeah, let's talk about the interim title fight that took place last night at 140 between Arnold Barboza and Jack Catterall. Now, here's what I want you guys to do before I go any further, right? I want you guys to go on DAZN's YouTube channel and look up the highlights for this fight, right? They've got a video, I think it's about 7 minutes long, something like that. Just watch that video, start to finish, right? And as you're watching it, just think to yourself, these are the highlights of a 12-round interim title fight, which really puts Jack Catterall's boxing career into perspective, doesn't it? So, first of all, the fight itself. Now, those of you who spoke to me on the build up to this fight, I didn't actually make a prediction video for it, but I did talk about it quite a bit on several live streams and in comment sections and whatnot. And I said from day one, and anybody can back me up on this who knows, I said from day one that as long as this fight was fairly officiated, as long as there was neutral international officials and no partisan hometown bias, Arnold Barboza will win this fight, and he'll win this fight easily, he'll win it conclusively, it won't even be that competitive. And the concern that I had highlighted prior to the fight, and a lot of people shared my concern, was that it was kind of a setup, that Jack Catterall would get the win no matter what, because that seems to be the trend in Catterall's recent career, and I'll of course go into detail about that in this video. But yeah, that was the only concern that I had. I didn't think that Catterall had any chance whatsoever, and I said this from day one, of legitimately beating a guy like Arnold Barboza. But I wasn't sure if Barboza would get a fair shake on the scorecards or from the referee. That was my concern. As far as Arnold Barboza himself goes and where he goes from here and how I see his future, I'll probably talk about that in a live stream if people are interested, because I don't really have that much to say about him right now. I don't really think he's that proven at the moment. I mean, yeah, it was a good win, and he's had a couple of good wins against kind of faded B-tier fighters at 140. And he's definitely a guy who's one to watch for the future, and I definitely expect him to hold a world title at one point. But right now, he hasn't really done that much for me to be too excited about him, so I'll probably talk about him, like I said, on a live stream or something. For this video, however, I want to focus on Jack Catterall, the loser. This guy, and let me be blunt here, let me not mix my words, this guy is one of the biggest disgraces, one of the biggest jokes in the history of boxing. One of the things that always irritates me about boxing, and I've talked about this many times in the past, is when you get a fighter who is essentially stealing a living from the sport, and a fighter who is basically living off of a false reputation created by the boxing media. There's a lot of fighters like this. Like, for example, one guy in particular who really reminds me of Jack Catterall, and I've talked about this in the past, is Guillermo Rigondeaux. Guillermo Rigondeaux was one of the biggest frauds in recent history in boxing. I mean, that guy was a complete hype job as a fighter. He was a spineless coward, a guy with absolutely zero heart. He was a guy who was a habitual cheater. Literally couldn't go 10 seconds without trying to cheat in a fight. And he was the type of fighter who had absolutely no respect whatsoever for the sport, no respect whatsoever for his opponents, no respect whatsoever for the fans and the audience and the paying public, no respect for the officials, no respect for the promoters, no respect for anybody whatsoever, just a grifter, just a guy who was in the sport to basically steal a living. That's what Guillermo Rigondeaux was. And coincidentally, his fighting style was actually very similar to Jack Catterall. So he would go in the ring, and if he figured out early on in the fight that he couldn't compete with you, he would just spend the entire fight running, holding, clinching, headlocking, sucker punching the opponent, hitting the opponent low on the blind side of the ref, hitting on the break, pulling the opponent to the ground and hitting them behind the head. That was essentially what his career came down to. That guy he literally couldn't go 10 seconds in a fight without trying to cheat or spoil or get some sort of unfair advantage. Yet for some reason, while all this was going on, he had this reputation, and for me it was a false reputation created by the media. A reputation that he was some sort of boogeyman, right? That he was some sort of road warrior, this guy that would fight anybody anywhere. No one wants to fight him. He's a badass. He's a danger man. He's this guy who, all the top 10 guys are just completely terrified of, and he's got all this honor, and he'll break your jaw, this, that, and the other. He had this reputation of being this tough guy, right? This badass, this fighting man, who also happens to be like an elite fighter technically. None of those things were true. He wasn't a very good technical fighter. The guy was just a hustler. He was like I said, a habitual cheater, and a guy who got by on fouls, illegal tactics, and picking his opponents at the right time. That's essentially what he got by on. Now, when he eventually had to step up and fight a genuine world-class fighter, he absolutely bottled it. He proved that he had no fighting heart. He proved that he had no desire, no will, and he basically shat it, right? He got completely exposed, and he's never recovered from it. Jack Catterall is the exact same type of fighter. So Jack Catterall, just a few years ago, right, got his big opportunity to fight Josh Taylor for the undisputed title. Taylor, who of course was riding high at that point, his reputation was at an all-time high. He had just made history in the 140-pound division, being the first British fighter to unify all 4 titles in the 4-belt era. And yeah, becoming undisputed lineal champion, it was a big deal at the time, a big accomplishment. And Catterall had his opportunity to go in there and fight for that, right? Put it all on the line and show what he was made of. Because he's a guy prior to that fight nobody was interested in. His fights were all boring. They were all snooze fests. Nobody liked him. He was box office poison. He couldn't fill a kettle, couldn't fill a bath. Like he was just a guy who was conveniently placed in the WBO rankings and had been there for a while, and had finally managed to make himself mandatory, right, without really taking any risks. So he goes in there against Josh Taylor. And this is where I talk about false reputations and false media narratives. He goes in there against Josh Taylor and doesn't come to win. No, he goes in there to survive, spoil, cheat, foul, and essentially ruin the fight, ruin the event, and try to steal the title from Josh Taylor. So he goes in there, and in the opening seconds of the fight, he starts cheating. Right, he throws his left hand, and then when he misses the left hand, he jumps on the opponent and puts him in a headlock. Right, he was able to do that the entire fight, right, from start to finish. And I made I uploaded a film study the day after the fight where I definitively proved this. So if anybody tries to say that I'm lying here or that this didn't happen, I'll just immediately block you, because I already proved definitively with video evidence that this happened. Every single round of that fight, the only reason that Jack Catterall was even remotely competitive, the only reason that he was able to even survive those rounds, was because he was allowed by a corrupt British referee to habitually cheat. Okay, he was ducking below the waist, he was hitting low, he was headbutting, he was hitting on the break, he was sucker punching, and again, he was excessively clinching and headlocking. Every time Taylor got anywhere near him, this guy would just jump on him and put him in a headlock. What are you supposed to do there? If you're a guy like Josh Taylor, you've never dealt with that before. You're coming to win, you're coming to fight, you're conducting yourself within the rules of boxing, and then you've got this guy who's just refusing to engage. What you have there is a recipe for a very, very ugly and very, very difficult night's work, and that's exactly what it was. Now, Taylor was able to fight hard, he was able to persist, he was able to eventually grab the fight by the scruff of the neck, and he was able to get Catterall on the run, and he was able to win the fight clearly and fairly, right? Now, unfortunately, while this happened, while Taylor got the win, and it was a difficult night's work, it was an awkward night's work against a very, very ungamely and unsportsmanlike opponent, but he got the win. Unfortunately, the Sky Sports commentators did what they do, and that's they painted a false narrative. Now, I'm actually going to make a separate video. This video's been in the works for a long time, where I'm going to talk about how Sky Sports, and this isn't just exclusive to Sky Sports, all the boxing broadcasters and commentary teams do this, but Sky Sports, for me, are probably the best at it. They're the most manipulative, right? I'm going to talk about how Sky Sports are able to manipulate viewers to convince them that a fight is going a particular way, rather than just calling the action for what it is. So they were able to convince thousands upon thousands upon thousands of idiot, retarded, normie boxing fans that Catterall won the fight and that it was a robbery. When, of course, anybody who knows how to score a fight, anybody who actually watched the fight and studied it objectively and didn't get into their feelings and, wasn't sitting there scrolling through Twitter, not actually watching it, and just listening to Matthew Macklin, anybody who did that actually knows that it wasn't a robbery. In fact, as far as I can tell, the only people in the YTBC, and you can go and look at the videos if you don't believe me, the only people in the YTBC who actually watched the fight and scored it round by round were myself and Johnny Boy. Nobody else did. And you might notice a difference between the people who had Taylor winning and the people who had Catterall winning. The people who had Taylor winning, like I said, sat and scored the fight round by round. I had it 1-14, 1-13 to Taylor, right, which was the same score as one of the judges. Johnny Boy actually had it wider than me. He had it by 3 rounds to Taylor, because I believe he was a little bit less lenient with the illegal tactics being used by Catterall, right? So he was taking those into consideration. I wasn't. I was giving Catterall the benefit of the doubt and actually just scoring the fight in accordance with punches landed, ring generalship, all that good stuff, right? And I had it for Taylor still. Everybody who had the fight for Catterall, what was their reaction? It was a robbery. He was robbed. He whooped his ass. He schooled him. So what did he, and you ask these people, what did he do to win the fight? Well, he schooled him and he whooped his ass. Yeah, but how did he win though? But he landed more clinches. And you bring up how he was only able to compete in the fight and was only able to temporarily negate Taylor's offense by breaking the rules of boxing, again, by refusing to engage in a boxing match and instead making it an MMA fight, a wrestling match, essentially. Okay, you're not allowed to, I don't know if you guys know this, but you're not allowed to just jump on your opponent's back, put your arm over their head and choke them. I don't know if you guys knew that it was in the rules of boxing that you're not allowed to do that. But when you point that out to these people, what was their response? Taylor was rabbit punching. He was rabbit. Taylor landed, like 5 rabbit punches in the entire fight, while he's got a guy literally riding him like a rodeo. And these people say, rabbit punches. He was rabbit punches. And yeah, look, let me not get into all that. I already made a video about how I scored the fight. And I scored it round by round. I definitively broke down how the fight went. I have a film study on my channel and my round by round score video. I'll actually post both of those in the description section to this video if you want to check it out. But I digress. My point is, Jack Catterall to this day is still living off of the reputation that was granted to him by Sky Sports during that fight, and of course in the aftermath of that fight where they lied to you and told you it was a robbery when it wasn't. So basically he goes into his next fight, his next meaningful fight anyway, which was of course the rematch. The false robbery narrative that was spread by Sky Sports and the boxing media got Catterall an undeserved rematch, and it was the exact same fight all over again. You got Taylor coming forward, applying pressure, coming to fight, coming to win, actually doing his job, actually engaging in the fight. And you've got Catterall holding, running, laying on the ropes, doing nothing, and occasionally throwing a sucker punch, or occasionally just jumping on the opponent, putting him in a headlock, headbutting him. And it was a situation where anytime Catterall did anything, anytime he actually threw a punch, which wasn't very often, I'd say about 90% of that fight, he was just running and doing nothing. But whenever he did actually do something, it was like Marquez in the third Pacquiao fight, right? Whenever he would, once in a blue moon, land a punch, The commentators start orgasming, they start climaxing, they start spunking up his back. Oh my god, he threw a punch. Wow, I'm giving him the next 3 rounds because he landed that punch. That's kind of how the fight was scored. And of course, all the normies, all the morons, they weren't actually watching the fight. They were scrolling through Twitter and probably jerking off while the fight was happening. So when Taylor clearly won the rematch, right, go and look at that fight again. It wasn't even that close. Catterall did next to nothing for like 90% of that fight. What happened? Well, the scorecards were pre-written for Jack Catterall. All right, he won the fight by like a 5-card margin on all the scores or something, despite clearly losing, and losing more clearly than the first fight, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, basically the reason why that happened was because, the judges were quote unquote being on their best behaviour. They understood what was expected of them. They understood that Jack Catterall needed to win the rematch in order to uphold the false media narrative that the British boxing fraternity was running with. So yeah, that happened. He then fights Regis Prograis. Now, I was at that fight. I got kind of roped into going to it, so I was in the crowd, and I was actually there. I've talked about this on stream. I was there with a whole bunch of Catterall fans, and he got absolutely schooled in that fight. He did absolutely nothing. For the first 9 rounds or so of that fight, he was just sitting on the back foot, doing nothing, not throwing a single punch, clinching every time Prograis got close. Again, just like the Taylor fight, breaking the rules non-stop. He got outlanded in almost every one of the rounds. He got dropped in one of the rounds. Then he came back later in the fight when Prograis, who was badly weight drained and visibly gassed, and of course had shown vulnerabilities like a weak chin and whatnot, he ended up scoring 2 knockdowns. And again, it gave the commentators an orgasm and whatnot. And that was enough for the 3 corrupt British judges, whoever they were. That was enough to give him like an 8-card margin victory on the scorecards, despite the fact he got outworked and outlanded in almost every round and lost the fight clearly. Even his fans in the audience, who I was sitting near, thought he lost. By the 3rd round, they were saying, "What's he doing? He's running. He's not doing anything. He's losing the fight. He's getting outlanded." So even his own audience, his own fans, knew that he lost that fight. And when he got the decision, they were shocked. They couldn't believe it, and they were over the moon. So yeah, that was kind of what I thought going into this Barboza fight. I was like, look, Barboza will win this fight because he's the better fighter in every way, shape or form. But I'm just not sure if he can beat the propaganda. I'm not sure if he can beat the commentators, the judges, the referee, and the entire British boxing fraternity. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and he was able to he was able to dominate the fight, winning at least 8 rounds, schooling Jack Catterall from long range. He was able to skillfully avoid the clinches, and he kind of, and Del Boy talked about this in his post-fight video, and this is something I did talk about sort of in the aftermath of the Taylor and the Prograis fight. I talked about how Catterall can't really deal with being forced to take the lead. He's a guy who needs you to go at him so that he can counterpunch and then clinch you and spoil and cheat and whatnot. If you have longer arms than him, and if you can box from long range and kind of utilize feints and a good jab and draw a lead from him, he has no idea what to do because he's a very, very limited, one-dimensional fighter. He's a very cowardly fighter who doesn't like to lead. If you look at his fight with O'Hara Davis, it was the same situation. He did nothing in that fight. Didn't throw a single punch in anger, ran the entire fight, stayed on the outside. And what made that fight particularly frustrating is that O'Hara Davis did the same thing. That was one of the worst fights I've ever seen. Neither one of those guys deserved to win. It should have been a draw. But again, even in that fight, Catterall got ridiculously wide scorecards in his favour. So, yeah, man, it's a situation here. Look, when it comes to these fighters, these grifters, these spoilers, these cheaters, these individuals who are stealing a living from boxing, where am I really going with this? Now, those types of fighters irritate me But it particularly irritates me when it's a British fighter. I don't know why that is. Like, when I see a British fighter do that sort of thing and conduct himself in that sort of manner, it kind of triggers me. It does. And it triggers me to see people call them a warrior and to say, oh, you got robbed, you're a victim. And it triggers me. The reason it triggers me so much is because I kind of expect more out of my own people. You know, when I see a British fighter, a British contender, a guy who's supposed to be, competing for a world title and whatnot, I expect them to go out on their shield. I expect them to put it all on the line. I expect them to fight within the rules, and I expect them to conduct themselves with some sort of sportsmanship and some sort of honour. I don't expect to see them going in there and just trying to steal an undisputed title and steal a living from boxing, essentially conning the fans, conning the audience. You guys might recall I used to be a big fan of Billy Joe Saunders in the early stage of his career. I really, really supported him on the way up, all the way through until he won the world title. But as soon as he won the world title, he became a grifter, right? He became a complete and utter joke. And he disgraced himself as far as I'm concerned. Conducted himself like a coward, ducked fights, avoided fights, had long layoffs, basically fought once a year, cherry-picked his opposition, and then ultimately sold out and took a dive against Canelo Alvarez, just sold the title and then retired in disgrace. Now nobody talks about him. He's in obscurity where he belongs, and rightfully so. Hopefully the same thing happens to Jack Catterall. Hopefully this idiot, this clown, disappears now, and we never have to see his face again. We never have to hear his voice. We never have to see constant constant articles on boxing websites that always have to bring up his controversial defeat to Josh Taylor, as if there was anything controversial about it. I mean, he has Taylor. He drops Taylor to the canvas with a combination of a low blow and a rabbit punch. Taylor's on the floor, and while he's on the floor, Catterall hits him in the back of the head with an uppercut, with the referee staring right at him, and somehow doesn't get disqualified. And yet they want to talk about controversy. They want to say that he was the one who got robbed. I mean, make that make sense. So yeah, I'm tired. This is kind of a rambling video. I just felt the need to do this. You guys know I've always had a real disdain for what I like to call fake fighters. Fighters who con a living from boxing. Fighters who live off of a false reputation that they only have as a result of mainstream media propaganda, lies, misinformation and bias. So screw Jack Catterall. I hope this guy loses his boxing license. I hope he gets blacklisted from boxing, and we can go back to watching boxing like he never existed. Yeah, praise be to our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ. Another fraud has been exposed. Thanks for watching, and God bless. More videos to come this week.